And I know sometimes there'll be records, for instance, the personnel record that may not be part of the C file that gets presented to the examiner too prior to the exam.
That can happen.
Now, you mentioned bringing the medical records. Should you submit any new medical records to the VA prior to the exam?
I don't think there's any great harm in submitting records to the VA prior to the exam. And you can also submit them after the exam, but keep in mind that showing them to the examiner in and of itself is not enough. Whatever you show the examiner, you also want to make sure you send to the VA. Before the exam is preferable, but after the exam, if you couldn't get it before the exam, just get it in. How
about in terms of who you bring with you to the exam? Can you bring a spouse, a caregiver? Is it helpful? Can they, come in with you, etc.?
That's a mixed bag. You can bring anyone you want. There's no issue about that. Whether the examiner will let them come into the exam room or will talk to them is at the examiner's discretion, as far as I can tell. I've found nothing that says they must absolutely do one thing or the other.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA. If you're a veteran struggling with the VA's disability system or just want to make sure you're getting the benefits you've earned, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an update that could change your life. I'm Christian Terrison here with renowned veterans disability attorney Francis Jackson of Jackson and MacNichol. Jack has dedicated his career to helping veterans like you win the benefits you deserve, recovering millions of dollars for thousands of heroes. This podcast isn't just for veterans navigating the system, though. It's for their families, their friends, and anyone else who wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who served. So stick around because we're here to make sure you get the support you need.
And today we're going to talk about C&P exams.
Yes, a perennial topic. They can, make or break a case or a claim for benefits, but just to understand the basics, what exactly is a VA C&P exam, and how does it differ from, a routine medical appointment?
Sure. Well, routine medical appointments for folks at the VA are with a provider who is there to focus on their health care. C&P exams are done by contractors who are not going to provide any health care. Their only job is to make an assessment of a particular condition, or sometimes multiple conditions, for the VA to use in their rating system. So you might be going to the VA for treatment for your heart, but if you go to a C&P exam for your heart, it's not going to be about, are you on the right medication, and, should we change your medication, and what are your current problems, and how can we improve them? It's going to be about how did your condition start, how it may be related to your service, and to the extent it's about the rating level, it may well be about your current symptoms and so on, but it's not going to be to improve your treatment. It's going to be to evaluate the condition so that the VA rating staff has more information on which to base their rating.
So under what circumstances does the VA schedule a C&P exam, and I guess why, essentially?
Sure. Well, C&P stands for compensation and pension. So the reason that VA would schedule an exam is if you have a compensation claim pending or a claim for pension pending. And in many claims, not all, the VA will decide that they need more medical information about your claim in order to determine either what the current level of difficulty is or how it's related to service, or both. They can use it for either. But the typical C&P exam will be when your claim is starting out and the VA is trying to sort out, is your condition connected to your service? And so one of the things they will ask the examiner, and sometimes the examiner will be a physician, sometimes it'll be a nurse practitioner or a PA, and for very specific things, for example, a hearing, it might be an audiologist, just depends on what your claim is. But they will schedule that exam, and they will ask the examining person to render an opinion about whether or not it is as likely as not that your condition is related to service. So if we're talking about a hearing claim and there's an audiologist, they'll look at things like, did you have a hearing test when you went into the service? Did you have a hearing test when you left the service? Is there a difference in how you were doing between those two? What's your most current hearing test look like? And, were you exposed to noise while you were in the service, particularly to sudden loud noises? Artillery is a particularly bad area of service for damage to the ears, for example. But they will look at the factors that relate to whether or not what you did in the service has a reasonably obvious potential relationship to your current claim.
So if I'm a veteran with a pending claim, how do I know when they're setting me up for a C&P exam? Should I look for a phone call, email?
Well, you won't typically get a phone call, but you may. I mean, they do that sometimes. Generally speaking, what you'll get is a notice in the mail saying that your C&P exam has been scheduled. Usually the only time that phone conversations come into this is if they send you a date and time and you can't make it and you have to get on the phone with them and reschedule.
So that's the best procedure if you can't make it, if they give you a time you can't be there, get on the phone to let them know?
You absolutely should reschedule. And that's not a perfect system. Sometimes they lose track of it and you get marked as having failed to show up, or it's like any other human communication. There are always potential problems. But if they schedule you for a C&P exam, do not just say, oh, I'm busy that day, and don't go without telling them. In most instances, that will lead to either your claim being denied or your claim being denied specifically because you didn't show at the exam. And that gets complicated and hard to undo down the road. So it's really important. If they schedule you for a time and say you should be there and you can't be there, call them, explain you can't be there, explain why, get them to agree that that's a good reason that you shouldn't be able to come that day, and to set you up for a different time.
So, God forbid, but what can a veteran do if they happen to miss their C&P exam due to some factor beyond their control? Or
Oh, it happens. In the northern parts of the country, winter storms are a classic for that, but there can be a whole variety of things. Recently, with all this flooding in North Carolina, there were people who were scheduled for C&P exams who couldn't get there because of the flood. But regardless of the reason, the critical thing is to call the VA, explain that you can't get there or couldn't get there if it's after the fact, and explain that there was a good reason why you couldn't get there, and ask them to reschedule. And I really can't stress this enough. If you don't go, it will probably result in dismissal of your claim. So don't let that happen. If you can't go, let them know in advance if possible. If something happens at the last minute and you can't go, let them know about it, get it rescheduled, and explain in detail if there's a specific problem. For example, we've had cases where someone was housebound and the VA scheduled them for an exam an hour away. There was no possibility the person could get there, but it's because the people who are scheduling these exams are just hired to schedule exams. They don't know really much of anything about your case. They'll see what conditions the exam is listed for, but that doesn't tell them, if you're unable to travel or anything like that. They're just going to assume that they can send you to an examining person somewhere in the general vicinity you're in, not necessarily right close by and convenient. And you have to pay attention and let them know if there's a problem, and really be specific. So, for example, we had one gentleman who literally was housebound, and they kept trying to schedule him for exams, and we had the wife just keep calling and saying, he can't travel. You must schedule him with someone who can come here and do the exam. And it took forever, but the point is, you can't just let those things slide, because what will happen is the claim will be dismissed, and then you'll spend the next year or 2 or 3 getting it undone, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, and C&P exams are already inherently sensitive topic. We're talking about disabling medical conditions, a lot of personal information. In cases involving, military sexual trauma claims and other extraordinarily sensitive issues, can a veteran request having a male or female C&P examiner or other accommodations for their exam? You
can always request it. The companies that do exams aren't obligated to honor those requests, but I think they will generally try to if you contact them and explain, that this is a PTSD or MST or something claim, and there are reasons why you need a same-sex examiner or whatever it is. By and large, these are well-meaning human beings, and they'll do their best to help out if they can. They may tell you that they can't in a particular case, but there's no downside to asking.
Sure. So it really is at the contractor's discretion, though. There's no
really
baked-in right to that.
There's no absolute requirement that they honor such a request.
And what type of evaluation or exam should veterans expect, or really, in many cases not expect during a C&P exam?
It's so dependent on the nature of the claim, but if it's a physical condition as opposed to mental, and particularly if it's a claim for an increase for a joint problem, ankles, knees, hips, back, you should assume or expect that the examiner will measure the range of motion that you can manage, whether it's bending your back or bending your knee or whatever, and you should anticipate they will use a little gadget called a goniometer, which is sort of 2 hinged pieces that can be moved to measure the angle that the joint moves, and you should anticipate that will be used. And one of the things that I think we're going to touch on later is things to do after the fact, and so we'll come back to the goniometer. But you should anticipate that for a physical condition, the examiner will probably want to do a physical examination. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes the examiner will just ask you questions and not do any physical examination, but generally speaking, for physical conditions, they will probably do a physical exam of the related body part.
Okay. And when veterans are thinking about what to bring with them to the exam, what to leave at home, what types of things are useful, what might be detrimental?
Well, generally speaking, you want to wear what you would wear if you were going for a physical at your doctor's office. Loose, comfortable clothing, something that you could take off if the examiner needed to examine a particular body part. If they're going to examine your knee, you might want to wear shorts. It's relatively common sense. In terms of what to take, my recommendation is always for veterans to take recent outside medical reports or medical notes if you have them. And if you have reports of something that happened in the service from your service records, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to take those with you and say to the examiner, gee, I don't know if you had a chance to see this in my record, but here is the page that shows where I was treated for my back. I don't think there's any downside to that. The examiner won't always look at what you bring, but you lose nothing by taking it.
Gotcha. And I know sometimes there'll be records, for instance, the personnel record that may not be part of the C file that gets presented to the examiner too prior to the exam.
That can happen.
Now, you mentioned bringing the medical records. Should you submit any new medical records to the VA prior to the exam?
I don't think there's any great harm in submitting records to the VA prior to the exam. You can also submit them after the exam, but keep in mind that showing them to the examiner in and of itself is not enough. Whatever you show the examiner, you also want to make sure you send to the VA. Before the exam is preferable, but after the exam, if you couldn't get it before the exam, just get it in.
How about in terms of who you bring with you to the exam? Can you bring a spouse, a caregiver? Is it helpful? Can they, come in with you, etc.?
That's a mixed bag. You can bring anyone you want. There's no issue about that. Whether the examiner will let them come into the exam room or will talk to them is at the examiner's discretion, as far as I can tell. I've found nothing that says they must absolutely do one thing or the other. It just seems to be left to the examiner's discretion. So if you think there's someone who can provide important information to the examiner about your case, I would suggest you try to get that person to come with you, and you say to the examiner right at the beginning, right at the outset, by the way, my wife, daughter, uncle, second cousin, best friend, whoever it is here, and they can tell you about XYZ, so the examiner at least knows that the person is there and has the option of talking to them about it if they want.
Another thing I was thinking of, too, is if you do have an unfavorable result, sometimes, for instance, at the hearing, I've been able to say to the judge, look, Mr. Jones tried to bring his wife. She would have told the doctor about these things. The examiner said, no, we are excluded from the exam. You can bring the wife in to testify. She can say, I would have told the doctor X, Y, Z, and it can really
It can
have
be
a big
important.
impact.
Yeah,
have a
that's
big
right.
impact. What are some of the most frequent misunderstandings you see veterans having when it comes to C&P exams? I know you mentioned some folks will expect medical treatment at these exams.
That's one kind of recurring issue, is people expect the examiner to talk about where they should be going with treatment. The examiner is very unlikely to do that. Another misconception is that the VA will have the examiner do testing. Typically, that's not the case. I mean, these things vary so much. I hate to say never, but it is unusual for a VA examiner to order tests. It's not out of the question. It can happen, but it's very unusual. Mostly, the things that they will typically do is talk to the veteran, sometimes fairly hastily, other times in greater detail. They may or may not talk to anybody that you brought with you. They may or may not be willing to look at any records you brought with you. But being prepared to have someone talk to the examiner and have records to show to the examiner will never hurt.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time for today, but I wanted to get to that topic of what to do after the exam, and in particular,
Sure.
if folks think something went wrong at the exam.
Sure. There are a couple of things you can do after the exam. If you feel that the examiner really, really did not do a good job and you can articulate why, say, for example, this is about your knees and the examiner didn't bother to do a range of motion test with a goniometer, there are a couple of things that you can do. One is to call the VA and explain what your concern is and ask for another exam. They probably won't do that, but they sometimes will, and it will never hurt. The other thing that you definitely should do is to write down what happened at the exam and why you think it was inadequate. So if you got to the exam and the examiner, when he or she got around to you, took you in and spent 3.5 minutes with you, asked you 2 questions, and then sent you on your way, that's probably worth writing down at the time exactly what happened, exactly what the times were. If you offered to have someone with you explain to the examiner what your symptoms are, what's been going on, and the examiner refused to talk to that person, it's probably worth writing that down. If you tried to show the examiner some recent updated records or some records that kind of delineate the specific claims that you're talking about, and the examiner refused to look at them, it's worth writing that down and keeping a copy of what those records were. What happens with these exams is that many times they will become pretty much the sole basis for the decision that the VA makes about the claim. And so if the decision they make about the claim is unfavorable, either in the sense that they turn down service connection or they give you an unreasonably low rating, either one, then you're going to want to be able to appeal or file a supplemental claim or otherwise pursue this. And the better description you have of any problems that occurred at the exam, the more that will be helpful on pursuing the claim.
All right, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you for tuning in to this episode of Victory Over VA. Please be sure to like and subscribe and join us next week.
We hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.